Thank you very much, Scott. It's just a pleasure to be here this morning. And let me get into my PowerPoint here. As we start, I want to say that last night I had the opportunity, after we left, to go back to the hotel and spend a great deal of time talking with Dr. West. As a matter of fact, I could have stayed up all night. We had such a good time. And she's going to be on the panel later on, but we were talking about just a number of things, and part of it's the challenge of trying to make science and math and STEM relevant and to our communities, to our kids. And so it's exciting to be here to talk about that. Let me just give you a little bit of background on Jason, and then I won't bring it up anymore. We're an interesting little nonprofit, as Joni said, started by Bob Ballard. And we're actually 25 years old. But 7 years ago, the model that we had been using was no longer relevant because of the assessments and the need to make everything standardized. So Bob, along with the head of National Geographic, John Fahey, got involved. They both sit on our board. And they wanted us to make everything web-based. So all of our materials are now web-based. We engage with the scientists. But the thing that has remained for the 25 years is the idea that kids get excited about heroes. And that we are Jason and the Argonauts, right? The most exciting adventurers in the world, looking for our golden fleece of knowledge. And that's really, I think, how we're approaching STEM education across the country. Texas has been in the lead for so many years. And I'd like for us to, as we're talking about the standards, to realize that really the paradigm of influence for talking about standards involves more than just the teaching and learning in a classroom. Again, as we know from the Gates study and all the studies that have come out, the most important aspect of teaching and learning happens in the classroom. It is the teacher. It makes education exciting. And the standards that we're going to talk about today have a huge impact on that, right? Because they will talk about the assessments, they line up the paradigms that we think about our kids learning, and so it's not only assessment and standards. But in addition, it's the organizational structures of our schools. It's our state policies. It's definitely local policies. It's resources. It's connections, it's partnerships. And all of that organizational structure makes a huge difference. One that I find interesting across the country is, and this is a quick example of a policy, is I find in high schools that we have students who are required to have 24 credits upon graduation. Texas has taken a great lead in that you require 4 credits, right, in science. That's so important. I find in some communities that students are still graduating with 20 credits and 2 sciences, and one of those they can still get out of by taking some kind of technical course. I mean, that's what you find is a real disparity across the country, but you all are the leaders in looking at those policies. Assessment. If the assessments, and as you know, they drive what we do in the classroom, if the assessments go down into the elementary school, then we're teaching science in elementary school. Reading has always been such an important component, but we can teach reading and science simultaneously. but it has to be clearly defined. And in many states, what you will see is that still the standard test for looking at science really do not start testing on scientific principles until you're in the middle school. So again, huge disparities across the country and just policies that drive the way that we structure schools. And then finally, school culture. And the way I think that as you listen to our discussion, as you think of the frame of community involvement. I always check my community involvement by discussions in the grocery store. I turn to someone in the vegetable section and we have a little discussion about health. And then I'm moving into the cereal section and we're talking about what's in the products. And what I find is that to a large extent, we're fairly oblivious as a culture and community in having real discussions about scientific literacy issues. We're certainly at a national level passing policies, but how do we get that discussion going in our communities? And I think for us to actually move to the scientific literate world that we need to be in, it's going to have to happen at all levels. It's going to have to be inclusive. And so it's so exciting that a community is here because it's the total involvement, the whole picture, that will make the difference. So as we go through the discussion today, maybe you can think in terms of these three paradigms, and we'll reference them back and forth. So next generation science standards. This is really a massive effort. It's been going on for about 2.5 years. And the many recent calls for improvements in K-12 science education have focused on the need for science and engineering professionals to keep the United States competitive in the international arena. Although there is little doubt that the need is genuine, a compelling case can also be made that understanding science and engineering now more than ever is essential for every American citizen. Science, engineering, and technologies influence and permeate every aspect of our modern life. Indeed, some knowledge of science and engineering is required to engage with public policy. We actually heard that even in the inaugural speech this week. And such as selecting among alternative medical treatments. You know, we are really entering a period of renaissance where the individual is being asked to make more and more individual decisions. And in the past, when you would just go to your doctor and expect that your doctor would tell you, now you look it up on the web and you evaluate and you determine. But that has to be true for every citizen. In addition to that, mathematics involved in finance. My goodness, we are expecting that every child, by the time they retire, will be able to handle their own portfolio and determine what good investments are. That's certainly a mathematical decision. It's a STEM-based need that we have. And then major public policy issues, such as investing public funds for water supply. All of these become a significant issue just for survival in today's society. But in addition, understanding science and the extraordinary insights it has produced can be meaningful and relevant on personal levels. We see so very many opportunities for art and science, and in a lot of communities they are fostering STEAM with the concept of blending the two. And certainly we know musicological and mathematics make sense, right? So it's a world out there that science and math are in everything. In these contexts, learning science is important for everyone, even those who eventually choose careers in fields other than science or engineering. And by the 12th grade, students should have gained sufficient knowledge of the practices, cross-cutting concepts, and core ideas of science and engineering to engage in public discussion on science-related issues.
And so the next generation science standards, and the newest draft has been released. It's online. It's free online to read. It's about 400 pages in length. And, but it is there for our perusal. It's also a very important time because from now to the end of the month, we can still make comment on what's in there. And so there, if you look up Next Generation Science Standards, you can go out and begin to look at this. The important thing about the Next Generation Science Standards is that it's a K-12 assessment paradigm that allows us to look at what children should be able to understand at grade points as they matriculate through their K-12 learning experience. And so it's set up by grades 2, by what children should know at the end of grade 5, what they should know by grade 8, and what they should know by 12th grade. In this, there are practices that involve understanding the practice of science and engineering, understanding how to develop hypotheses, how to ask questions, how to be curious. One of the questions that came up last night was, when are students able to begin these thought processes? And the answer was, we see it all the time in early grades in schools. Mr. Chambers answered that, and so immediately, you know, I actually, and I'm sure it's not true in Texas, but in a lot of places that I've seen, I think our kids are born with it and we somehow just snuff it out of them, is really what we're doing. For a number of reasons. Again, our intentions are good, but our follow-through is not always there. So as you look at the practices, you see the concept of pedagogical skills. It means that kids actually have to be engaged in experimentation. They have open-ended questions. It's not, this is a body of knowledge, learn it, and you will know all the answers. It is, this is a body of knowledge that is ever-changing and ever-moving, and so let's approach it that way. Then there are major cross-cutting concepts that move between the practices and the content that are really about systems thinking, about energy and matter, flows, cycle, conservation, pieces that you find in all the content, but also in the practices. So again, blending the two so that our young people are very thoughtful in the way that they approach thinking about science and engineering. And then finally, the content, which of course is very important. There's physical science, life science, earth and space science, engineering, technology, and applications of science. And the document, although Texas is not one of the early states involved in this, we have 26 states that have been early adopters. Many of the writers for this actually come from Texas. So what I would tell you is that the next generation science standards are going to influence the way that we teach science, whether or not we actively adopt it or not. I'm actually from Virginia, and Virginia is not an early adopter either. But what you find is that this is becoming so important to the nation that it's already being embedded in the way that we think about how we will teach science. And I told the joke about Virginia, but we're much different than you. How many Virginians does it take to change a light bulb? 6, 7. One to change the light bulb, the other 6 to talk about the good old light bulb. That would be what we do in Virginia, not how you all approach things here in Texas. So to give you a little sense, and again, I'm not sure how much time you've been spending on this elegant document, but There's a matrix of standards by grade and topic that NSTA has put out, National Science Teachers Association. And we made some copies for you, and we'll also put it on the web, A+, and Sandra has some of them, and she'll pass them out, and you can look at them, again, if you're trying to make meaning for yourself. But what it begins to do, again, this document, is that it says this is what you should teach in kindergarten. And when you teach this in kindergarten, so if you're teaching weather in kindergarten, then these are the ways that this is what students should learn about it. And then it should be picked up again in middle school. And in middle school, this is how you should think again about weather, and this is what our kids should know. And then in high school, this is what kids should know. So again, the nice piece of this is it is a vertical as well as horizontal connection in curricular knowledge. And so that makes it very important. I'll give you another quick little example. Energy and chemical processes and everyday life is a piece of the NGSS. At grade 2, we think that students should be able to rub their hands together and talk about friction. And if they put a little lotion in there, then they can understand that friction can be adjusted, right? So at second grade, thinking in those terms about the concept of friction. By 5th grade, we're talking about energy production. Not only are we looking at conversion of stored energy, so water in a dam, how it's released, how it turns a turbine, and produces electricity. And then we're also beginning to understand how the food makes that work. By grade 8, complex food molecules requiring energy input, and the reaction of CO2 and H2O combining to form carbon-based organic molecules. This is 8th grade. I love it when 8th graders talk that way. Isn't that great? By 12th grade, we expect that our students are able to talk about nuclear fusion processes on the sun, and that releases energy, and it reaches us as radiation, photosynthesis, transferring that to how solar cells work, forms of electricity generating, and what that means for transportation, fuel impacts, benefits, environmental costs, machines judged as effective and ineffective and efficient based on energy inputs and outputs. So again, you can see the stranding of knowledge. And so it gives us a good outline. Now let's talk about some of the outcomes really quickly. Some of the positive outcomes as a nation that we're thinking that we're seeing here is that the NGSS gives us a framework to talk across the nation about the level of student learning. And there is buy-in, and it's occurring at state level and certainly at the federal government level. I don't know that that gives us any more money in implementing them, but certainly understanding. Public-private partnerships, I believe strongly that we are at a very unique point in education in this country. And for the first time, it is the private sector that is going to make a significant difference in what happens in public education. You see it more and more, and where there are partnerships, then we see communities really getting involved, systemic and sustainable change occurring through these partnerships. And Chevron, I think, is actually one of the leaders in the way that they are going about it in this community. Define paradigms and science standards. Again, it gives us a framework for developing our curriculum, developing pacing guides. Curriculum development will still be very state-based, TEKS will be there. We'll test on the curriculum. It is a state role, but more and more the way it's done is going to be state and local. And we are entering a time that is just truly amazing in the number of developing opportunities. And so finally, it's an opportunity for us to focus on learning precepts. The concepts of time on task. The more and more that we put this online, the more and more we're able to extend the day. The more and more we're able to engage after-school programs that reinforce what we're doing in school, the more we're going to see our kids learning. The more that we're able to engage the technology to accelerate learning and to differentiate so that a teacher who is teaching in a classroom with 30 students is not overwhelmed because it is hard enough to teach. And now we expect them to be able to differentiate all 30. The only way you can do that is through the use of technology. So the positive outcomes that we see with the standards are these. Some of the challenges that are emerging across the country, teacher training. It needs to be extensive. You do a wonderful job in Texas, but we know that teachers who have a sense of efficacy, they have the knowledge of the content that they're teaching, they have a comfort with the pedagogical skills, and they are able to diagnose and prescribe for their student bodies. That takes a great deal of training and investment in time and a release from thinking that they have to answer multiple choice tests. So we either teach beyond the assessments or we figure out a way to relieve our teachers a little bit. Leadership. It is absolutely vital that our superintendents and our principals are talking about the curriculum that we're teaching in our schools and our school boards. And without that discussion of what kids are learning, we spend a lot of time talking about other issues, finance, safety, very important assessments, very important issues, but we have to get back to talking about our expectations. Superintendents in Texas are hugely involved in the discussion of curriculum in a way that I don't see in other states. And I think that that is just very valuable. Community knowledge, again, we need to have our communities engaged. Assessments I've mentioned, teaching materials. Teaching materials is a fascinating component right now across the country. The big boys are revamping, the textbook companies are revamping, and there are so many start-up groups out of universities, out of small groups, nonprofits that are producing amazing materials. But you have to know how to find them. And it's kind of the Wild West. It's like technology is our penicillin, and we have great teachers who can administer it, but in the middle, we don't have any pharmacists to help us to know what to prescribe for that piece. So it's kind of the Wild West out there right now with materials. Resources, again, it's finding a good resource and embedding it for your use. What works for you? What works for your community? How do you engage? And then there are a number of new science courses that need to be developed. We still focus on kind of the basics. And so I believe every student in high school should have a full year of energy, just to focus on energy, because that's such a big issue for us in this country, and it will be, continue to be. So we don't have a lot of new courses that are being developed, but it's an opportunity for us. And then finally, higher education. We have to have more communication with students who are moving into four-year colleges as well as the community colleges. It is that vertical movement that's going to make a big difference for them and us. So I show you this because, again, I'm just showing you what we're doing, but we're aligning the engineering practices and science practices in our curriculum. Just like anyone else who's developing curriculum, we're paying attention. And so when we get down to constructing explanations and we're looking at engineering practices, one of the ways that we talk about velocity is through car crashes. And so we work with IIHS, the Institute for Highway Safety. One of their scientists is working with us, and so we teach kids about motion through car crashes. But we're aligning our curriculum with the national standards. And we're trying to make it more and more engaging all the time. Again, this is online, but you can see this is anywhere between 5th and 8th grade level for how it's using. You see the checking for understanding. But an important piece in all curriculum, again, and you find it in what we're doing, is finding ways to engage kids in hands-on activities. Because it is not only the high-tech opportunities, but it's the high-touch opportunities that cause our kids to get excited about science. Thomas Jefferson High School is one that I particularly always benchmark against. This is their high school curriculum in science, and we're seeing more and more of this across the country. But I want you to see and think about this in terms of, this is certainly challenging, higher end, but my favorite piece here is the senior research paper. And I think that the other really exciting piece about the internet is that our kids are able to publish. And so we're seeing senior thesis, and I look more and more for the opportunity for our kids to be engaged at lower grades in publishing their work. Houston Community College, I was looking through some of their courses. They have some great courses, and I was wondering, again, in my column of policies, how many of these courses can kids take that they're able to count into their science STEM diploma? Do they get an extra seal? Are they able to embed some of these so that they get extra opportunity? And then finally, there's the motivation piece really quickly. Create heroes, find pathways to new jobs. The mentoring from business is huge. High expectations for all our children. The adventures in technology. I love the apps that are coming out. I'll show you one really fast. And then create culture. You know, it is the culture. It is that somehow the science fairs are so exciting that everybody in the community wants to go to them. That the recognition at those science fairs brings everyone out. Those pieces. These are some of our scientists. Notice that they look like our students. And our students have to look at the scientists and they have to say, I can be like this person. And that's a really important component. We do it on a national level, but it can be done on a local level. And it's that connection with kids that makes such a difference. As we're increasing what they have to know, we have to get them enthused and excited about it and seeing the opportunities. And so just really quickly, we've had the opportunity to bring Tracy Drain, who is a NASA scientist. She's an amazing woman. And you can see that she was with the A-Leaf middle school students. And you can again get a sense of how important it is, again, for these scientists to be there with the kids. These are some of our Jason Argonauts. You can see teachers, kids, and you can see we were doing abiotic, biotic exploration here, and they were just doing some different experiments. But this is before they actually went out to the Mediterranean, and they came back with just amazing stories. Finally, Bob Ballard, our founder, inspired, we were in Beaumont, Texas. Beaumont, Texas has a community program with Jason, and they've kept it going for about 15 years now. But we were at Lamar University last year, and Bob spoke to almost 10,000 kids. And the president of Lamar University said that we beat out Elton John, so we were pretty proud of it. But even more importantly, kids were mesmerized, and Bob is telling them what he finds and how the world is out there for all of them. So it's science for everybody. You may not be the lead scientist on the Nautilus. You may be in communications. You may be one of the assistants who is putting the ROV into the ocean. Again, it's a tiered opportunity, but it's science for everyone. I'm running out of time, so again, handheld devices, I'm going to miss this, but if you want to know about some of the projects we're doing, I'd love to share them. Science Starter is another company that we do a lot of partnerships with, and they are looking for citizen science projects. We love citizen science. Kids get excited because it's real, and they actually are involved in it. The other thing, if you want to communicate with me, I can share numerous different resources with you, and would be glad to do that too. Finally, another partner that we have is Battelle. Battelle, as you probably know, runs a lot of the science installations across the country. And we're really excited because we're developing a math piece called Fun Functions. This one we're actually going for extrinsic motivation. If you do well in learning your math, ultimately you'll get to go to an Ohio State football game, right? So we're gonna pilot that in Ohio in the fall, but it's an extrinsic piece, and it's a whole community involvement piece that we're pretty interested in. And then finally, I want to come back just really quickly to the model we have here with Chevron. Chevron is very interesting in that when we talked about this model, they said we want it to be systemic and sustainable, and you have to ensure that. And so the only way to have something, I believe, systemic and sustainable is to build from the bottom as well as the top. And we've been really excited about the superintendent's involvement in this model. And we're in Spring Branch and Alief, Aldine, Cypress Fairbanks, Southwest Schools. And so the superintendents are really leading the design along with their boards. And then as we create communities of learning, we just step back and it happens, right? So it's a coaching model, teachers are involved, but I think it's take away Jason and listen to the model. The model is, Joni drives a hard bargain, so we have to report out a lot on data, and we're tracking how, we track usage off our website. So as teachers are using, we actually send reports to the district showing who's using and who isn't. So we send that, then teachers are looking, the school districts are looking for things that they're particularly interested in, like differentiation and acceleration models. We share that out with the group. We publish within the group a report every 2 months sharing out what's happening. And we're working on white papers with the superintendents and the principals that we'll release on our website in the spring. We think that this is going to give us a model of organizational change in the STEM world. And it will be the first in the country because in a lot of the STEM processes, again, it's been focusing on teachers and not looking at organizational models. And so certainly the standards are vital, and we're so excited about them, but again, if you contextually can think about the implementation in the classroom, the way that schools need to look, and then also how the community reacts to those. And with that, I just thank you for being here. I hope that's given you enough of an overview, and we'll move to the panel. Thank you so much.